The card reader blinked red. 9 times. My own mother stood 3 feet away, purse over her shoulder, the spare key card sitting inside it. She looked at the reader. She looked at me. Then she said, "It's only half an hour, Nicole. Don't make a scene." I was standing outside a building I have run for 7 years, locked out of my own front door on a Saturday in front of half the town. My sister was inside. My mother had the spare that could have let me in, and she chose not to use it. I said nothing. I just watched the light blink red and started counting seconds in my head, because that is what I do when I cannot do anything else. Let me back up so you understand exactly what you are looking at. My name is Nicole Hamilton. I'm 32 years old. I run a place called Hamilton Grange Hall on Jackson Street in Ottawa, Illinois. I'm not the owner, not exactly. I'm the custodian. That's an actual title, written into an actual legal trust. My grandmother built that building's second life out of an old Grange chapter back in 1968, and it became the place where this town held its weddings, its funerals, its Sunday dinners for people who had nobody else to cook for them. When she died, she didn't leave the hall to whoever shouted loudest at the reading. She left it to whoever had actually shown up for it. That was me. If you've ever been the daughter who did the work while someone else got called the favorite, stay with me on this one. Hit like, subscribe, and before this is over, tell me what city you're listening from and what time it is right where you're sitting. I want to know who's out there with me tonight. My grandmother's name was Janet Hamilton. She was born in 1938, and she ran that hall herself for most of her life. In 2015, she set up something called the Hamilton Hall Heritage Trust, with a lawyer named Kenneth Barber drawing up the paperwork. In it, she created the custodian role, the person who would carry the hall forward after she was gone. In 2016, I started working there part-time, 22 years old, sweeping floors and setting up folding chairs for other people's happiest days. She named me her successor custodian in 2017. She died in 2019 at 81 years old. I became full-time custodian that same year, 25 years old, with a set of keys and a job nobody else in my family had ever wanted until it started looking valuable. My older sister is Valerie Hamilton Roman. She's 35. She's a licensed real estate broker here in Illinois, and she is married to a man named Danny Roman, who runs a development company. My mother is Carol Hamilton, 63, and she holds our family's seat on the hall's board, the trustee seat that came down through our grandmother's line. My father, William, is 65, retired and mostly quiet. He was there that day, too. He didn't say a word. I want you to understand something about my family before I tell you what happened on that sidewalk. Valerie was always the one they photographed. I was the one who filled in the folding chairs behind her. Nobody ever said it out loud. They didn't have to. You learn to read a room by the time you're 7, and I read that room a long time ago. The day this started was our town's Founders' Day festival this year, which everyone in Ottawa treats like a second Christmas. The hall runs a booth every year, and I always run it myself, because it's the one day the whole town sees what we do. I got there at 8 in the morning to set up tables. Valerie showed up at 9, which was strange because Valerie does not do mornings unless there's a reason. By 10, she told me she needed to run something by the board about a rental request, and could I go check on the caterer setup out front for a bit? I didn't think anything of it. That's the job. I went. When I came back to the side entrance 20 minutes later, my card wouldn't work. I want to explain how that system works, because it matters. Back in 2020, the county put in a grant requirement for historic buildings like ours, a key card system called SentryGate, so every door had to log who came and went. I set the whole thing up myself. I'm the main administrator on that system. A man named Greg Simmons, who chairs our board, is the backup. Every single time that door locks or unlocks, it writes itself down somewhere. I didn't know yet how much that would matter. That day, I just knew my card. My own card, the one I use every single morning of my working life, was showing a red light instead of green. I tried it again. Red. I walked around to the front, also locked. Through the glass, I could see Valerie standing in the main hall with Danny and a woman I didn't recognize, holding a folder and a small measuring device, the kind appraisers carry. I called Valerie's phone. She didn't pick up. I texted her. Nothing. I went and found my mother, who was sitting at the festival's raffle table like it was any other Saturday, and I told her I was locked out of my own building. That's when she reached into her purse, and I saw it. The spare key card. The real one. The original board spare. The one that's supposed to live inside the hall's office safe, not inside my mother's handbag at a street fair. She looked at it. She looked at me. And she put it back. "It's only half an hour, Nicole," she said. "Don't make a scene." I stood there and did the math out loud in my head, because that's what I do instead of raising my voice. 30 minutes. That's what the system would later show exactly. 30 minutes locked out of a building I have opened every single morning for 7 years, on the one day of the year when the whole town is standing on the sidewalk watching me try the door. My father stood a few feet off, hands in his pockets, saying nothing at all. He has a talent for that. He's had it my whole life. I want to tell you I made a scene. I didn't. I walked to the shade by the flower boxes my grandmother planted decades ago, and I waited. I watched people I've known since I was a kid glance at the locked door, then at me, then look away like they'd seen something private they shouldn't have. A woman from the Historical Society asked if the hall was closed for a private event. I told her I didn't know. That was the truth. I genuinely did not know. At 29 minutes, by my own count, the door opened. Valerie stood in the frame, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, smiling like she'd just stepped out of a nap. "Oh, there you are," she said. "Sorry, we got wrapped up. You know how appraisals go." I hadn't heard the word appraisal from anyone yet. Not from her, not from the board, not in any meeting I'd been invited to. I filed that word away and said only that I was glad to be let back in. Danny nodded at me on his way out. Friendly, easy, the way a man is friendly when he already thinks the room belongs to him. The appraiser didn't look at me at all. She was too busy folding her measurements into that folder. I went back to my booth. I finished the day. I smiled at every family that came through, because that is also the job. But I kept turning one thing over in my mind the whole afternoon. Quiet, the way you turn a stone in your pocket until the edges start to matter. My mother had the real spare key in her purse. She chose to leave me standing outside instead of using it. And somewhere behind that locked door, my sister had let a developer and an appraiser walk through a building that isn't hers to sell. I didn't confront anyone that night. I drove home, I made dinner for one, and I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open to the SentryGate dashboard, the one only Greg Simmons and I have real access to. I didn't open it yet. I just sat there with my hand on the mouse, thinking about how long 30 minutes actually is when you're the one left outside your own door, and how short it must have felt to everyone standing on the other side of it. I did not open the dashboard right away. I sat there with my hand on the mouse for a long minute, the kitchen clock ticking behind me, and I thought about what I actually wanted to find. Not proof of a bad afternoon, proof of a pattern. I logged in. SentryGate keeps everything, every door, every card, every second going back years, because that is what the county grant requires. I pulled up the side entrance for that day and set the window from 9 in the morning to noon. The first thing I saw was my own card. Green, 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 all the times I'd come and gone setting up tables. Then, at 10:11 that morning, red. Denied. I kept scrolling. 10:13 denied again. 10:16 denied. It logged every single attempt I made on that door. 9 of them in total, every one marked the same way. Access denied, lockdown active. Lockdown active. Not just a locked door. An actual mode, the kind you trigger on purpose, the kind that overrides every card in the system except the one that started it. I sat back in my chair. I know that system because I built the county's compliance file on it myself 5 years ago. A lockdown mode isn't something the door falls into by accident. Somebody has to walk up to a reader and hold a card against it in a specific way, longer than a normal tap to trigger it. And once it's triggered, only that same card or an override from an administrator account can end it. I am the administrator. Greg Simmons is the backup. Neither of us started that lockdown, so I scrolled to the top of the log to the exact second it began. 10:06 that morning. A card ID logged the trigger. Not my card, not Greg's. A card ID marked board spare. Dash. Backup. I stared at that for a while, because I had seen the actual board spare, the real one, sitting inside my mother's purse at the raffle table, 20 minutes into that lockdown. I watched her hand hover over it and then close her purse instead of using it. If that card was in her purse the whole time, it could not have been the card standing at a reader at 10:06 in the morning, triggering a 30-minute lockdown from the inside, which means there were 2 cards answering to the same name in that system, and only one of them was sitting in my mother's purse. I did not respond to that thought with anything dramatic. I just wrote the date and the exact minute on a sticky note and pressed it to the edge of my laptop, the way I'd label an invoice I meant to follow up on. That is genuinely how my mind organizes a problem. Line items, dates, numbers I can hold on to when everything else in the room is soft and vague and full of people telling me not to make a scene. I called Robin before I let myself think about it any longer than that. Robin Cruz has worked events with me at the hall for 4 years now. She books half our weddings herself, and she is the only person in my life who has ever heard me complain about my family without immediately trying to defend them to me, because she was standing right there for most of it. "It's late," she said when she picked up. "You okay?" "Somebody used a second board spare key card today," I said. "A duplicate. Not the real one. The real one was in my mother's purse the entire time I was locked out." There was a pause on her end, the kind where I could hear her sitting up in bed. "Wait, locked out. Nicole, what happened at the festival? You texted me you were fine. I was fine. I was outside for 30 minutes while Valerie showed the building to Danny and some woman with a folder. An appraiser," Robin said slowly, like she was trying the word on to see if it fit what she already suspected. "You think they're doing something with the land?" "I don't think anything yet," I said. "I'm reading a report. That's all this is right now. A report." "Nicole." She said my name the way she does when she thinks I'm underselling something to myself before I've even let myself feel it. "Your own sister locked you out of a building your grandmother built, so a developer could measure it, and your mother watched her do it with the real key sitting in her bag. That's not a report. That's a family deciding you don't count." I didn't argue with her. I just told her what I had, plainly, the way I'd read out numbers on a spreadsheet, the lockdown trigger time, the 9 denied entries against my own card, the card ID that didn't match anything I'd ever issued or logged myself. "So somebody had a duplicate cut," Robin said. "Who does that? You can't just walk into a hardware store and get one of those made." That was true. Sentry Gate cards aren't the kind you copy at a kiosk in a grocery store. They're proximity cards tied to a specific vendor system. And around here, there's really only one shop set up to cut them, because it's the same company that installed our readers back in 2020. "Stevens Lock and Security," I said. "Roger Stevens did our install. If anybody cut a duplicate of that card, it went through him. So go ask him." "And say what?" "Hi, did my sister come in and have a copy of our board's master key made behind my back? He's not going to just hand that over because I walk in and ask nicely." "You're the custodian," Robin said. "Isn't that supposed to mean something?" I looked at the sticky note on the edge of my laptop, the date and the time written in my own small handwriting, and I thought about how many times over the last 7 years I had been the one filling out the forms, signing for the deliveries, calling the vendors, being the name on every piece of paperwork that kept that building standing. If it meant something, it hadn't meant it out loud to anyone in my family yet. Maybe it was time it started meaning something to someone outside my family instead. "It's supposed to mean something," I said. "I'm going to find out how much." I didn't sleep well that night, not because I was afraid, but because my mind kept running the same 3 numbers over and over. 30 minutes locked out, 9 denied attempts. one card ID that shouldn't have existed. I am not someone who cries when I am hurt. I get quiet and I start collecting things, the way some people collect string until it's long enough to tie something down. The next morning, I opened the hall an hour before Robin usually came in, because I wanted to be alone with the building for a while. I walked the whole main hall slowly, past the folding chairs stacked against the far wall, past the little brass plaque near the stage that has my grandmother's name on it and the year the hall reopened as a Grange building in 1968. I stood under it for a second. I thought about the word appraiser again, about Danny standing there so easy, so at home, like the room already belonged to him. I hadn't been told about any appraisal. Nobody had put it on a board agenda. Nobody had asked me, as custodian, to sign off on anything, and under the trust my grandmother wrote, nothing involving a sale or a lease of this building is supposed to move without me. I knew that much even before I understood exactly how deep that authority went on paper. So somewhere in this building, there had to be more than just a key card story. If Valerie was quietly walking a developer through an appraisal, there would be paperwork behind it somewhere. Listings don't happen by handshake. Someone drafts an agreement, someone signs it, and whoever signs an exclusive listing on behalf of a property usually keeps a copy close, in case anyone ever asks to see it. We keep an archive room in the back of the hall, off the old kitchen, full of file boxes going back decades. Most of it my grandmother's handwriting on the folder tabs. Valerie has a key to that room too, same as I do, same as any board member, because it's never been anything more than a storage closet full of banquet contracts and old grant applications. I didn't go looking that morning. I want to be honest with you about that. I stood in the doorway of that archive room with my hand on the frame, and I made myself walk away instead, because I did not want to go digging through my sister's things off a hunch and a sticky note. I wanted to build this the way my grandmother would have wanted it built, slow, with my hands clean, so that when I finally did lay something out in front of people, nobody could say I'd gone looking for a fight. I locked up the archive room, went back out front, and started setting up for the day like nothing at all had happened, because that is exactly what I intended everyone to believe, for now. I did not go home first. I drove straight from the hall to Stevens Lock and Security, out on the edge of town where the shop backs up against the rail line, because if there was a paper trail behind that duplicate card, it started there, and nowhere else. Roger Stevens has run that shop for as long as I've had a driver's license. He's the one who came out in 2020 and put readers on every door in the hall, back when the county grant made us do it. He knows my name. He knows my face. He knows me as the person who calls him every time a battery dies in a reader or a hinge starts sticking on the side door. He was behind the counter when the bell over the door rang, wiping down a key-cutting machine with a rag, and he smiled at me the way he always does. Nicole. Don't tell me something's down again. Nothing's down, I said. I need to ask you about a card. He set the rag aside. Something in my voice must have told him this wasn't the usual call. Which door? Not a door. A card. A Sentry Gate duplicate. I think somebody had one cut here recently, off the hall's system. He went quiet in a way I recognized, the careful quiet of a man who suddenly understands that a simple favor might not stay simple. Nicole, you know I can't just hand over customer information because somebody walks in and asks. I'm not asking as somebody, I said. I'm the account holder on that system. I'm the one who signed the service contract with you in 2020. I'm the primary administrator of record. If a duplicate of our board spare got cut through your shop, that's not a stranger's file you'd be protecting. That's mine to see. He looked at me for a long moment, and I let him look because I wasn't going to fill that silence with anything softer than what I'd already said. Then he turned to the computer at the end of the counter and started typing. We keep the work orders for those cards separate from the walk-in stuff, he said, half to himself. Because they're keyed to a specific account, we log the pickup by hand too. Signature required. Insurance thing since 2022, after that mess with the dentist's office downtown. I remember that, I said, though I didn't really. I just wanted him to keep talking. He found it. I watched his face change while he read the screen just slightly, the corner of his mouth pulling down. Work order came through about 6 weeks back, he said. Duplicate cut off your system. Billed to a card on file for Carol Hamilton. I kept my hands folded on the counter. My mother's card. That's what it says here. He turned the monitor a few degrees, not quite toward me, still cautious, but enough that I could see the date and the account name myself. But the card on file doesn't tell you who walked in and picked it up. That's a separate log. We keep it in the drawer here. Actual paper, actual signature, because half our older customers won't sign anything electronic. Can I see it? He hesitated one more second, and I understood that hesitation wasn't about hiding anything from me. It was about a man deciding whether doing the right thing by one customer meant doing wrong by another. Then he pulled open the drawer beneath the register and thumbed through a stack of carbon copy pickup slips until he found the one with that work order number written across the top. He set it on the counter between us and turned it so I could read it right side up. I looked at the signature line. Valerie Hamilton Roman. Her full married name, written out the way she signs everything official, in that looping hand she's had since high school. Date of pickup, 6 weeks before Founders Day. A line at the bottom where the shop notes who the card was released to, and underneath it, in Roger's own handwriting, a note. Released in person. Photo ID checked against name on work order. I didn't say anything for a second. I just read it twice, the way I read a contract before I sign it, checking that the words meant exactly what I thought they meant the first time. She picked it up herself, I said. Says so right there. Roger rubbed the back of his neck. Look, Nicole, I want to be straight with you. When she came in, she told me she was picking it up for the board, said it was a routine backup replacement since your mother's the trustee on record. I had no reason to think otherwise. We get a dozen of these a year for churches, historical societies, places like yours. Nobody flagged it as strange. It wasn't strange to you, I said. It's strange to me. Why's that? I looked at him. And for the first time since I'd walked into that shop, I let a little of what I actually felt show in my voice. Not anger, just weight, because the real board spare never left my mother's purse. I watched it sit there myself 3 weeks ago while I stood locked outside my own building. If the original never moved and a second one exists with my sister's signature on the pickup slip, then somebody built a spare key into this family that the board never approved and I was never told about. Roger didn't say anything for a moment. He looked down at the slip like he was seeing it differently now, too. You want a copy of this? I want the original, I said, and I understand if you can't give me that. A copy's enough for now. He walked to the back and ran it through the machine himself, didn't hand it off to anyone else working the counter. And when he came back, he set the copy in front of me, along with a printed page from the work order system, showing the billing details. For what it's worth, he said, sliding both across. If this ever goes somewhere official, I'll say the same thing to whoever asks that I just said to you. She told me it was routine. I had no way of knowing it wasn't authorized. I believe you, I said, and I did. Roger Stevens didn't do anything wrong. He cut a key for a woman who showed him identification that matched a name on a work order, and he logged it exactly the way the law requires him to. The only person who'd done anything wrong was the one who'd walked in here with a story that wasn't true and a signature that was. I folded both pages into the folder I'd started keeping in my car, the same folder that already held my printed key card report and the sticky note with the date and the exact minute the lockdown began. I thanked him, and I meant it, and I drove out of that lot with the windows down because I needed the air moving past me while I thought. 6 weeks before Founders Day. That meant this wasn't a decision Valerie made the morning of the festival, in some rushed moment I could maybe forgive as thoughtless. She had planned this. She had walked into a locksmith's shop over a month ahead of time, with a story ready, and set up exactly the tools she'd need to lock me out of my own building on the one day she knew the whole town would be watching the door. I thought about the word appraisal again, the one Valerie had used so easily the moment she opened that door and found me standing there. Appraisals don't happen without a reason behind them. Someone has to be planning to sell something, or at least pricing it out for someone who is. And if my sister had gone to the trouble of getting her own key made in secret 6 weeks in advance, then whatever she was planning wasn't a passing thought either. I didn't call her. I didn't call my mother. I drove home with that folder on the passenger seat, and somewhere past the second stoplight on Jackson Street, right past the hall itself, lit gold in the late afternoon the way it always is this time of year, I decided what came next. I needed to understand exactly what my grandmother's trust actually said about all of this, in the actual words of the document, not in whatever version of it my family had been quietly rewriting in their own heads for the last 6 weeks. And there was only one person left alive who had helped her write it in the first place. I didn't call ahead. Kenneth Barber's office sits above the old pharmacy on Jackson, 2 blocks from the hall, close enough that I'd walked past his window 1,000 times without ever once needing to go up those stairs. He drafted the trust for my grandmother back in 2015. He'd been the one standing next to my mother at the funeral in 2019, holding the folder that made me custodian in front of everyone before I'd even stopped shaking from the cold at the graveside. If anyone still alive understood what that document actually said, word for word, it was him. His assistant told me he had a 4 o'clock free if I didn't mind waiting 20 minutes, and I said I didn't mind at all, because 20 minutes gave me time to sit in that little waiting room and go through my folder one more time, straightening the pages like that would make the story inside them any less true. When he finally opened his door and saw my face, he didn't ask me how I was doing. He just said, "Come on in, Nicole," in that same even voice he uses for everyone, whether they've come to sign a will or contest one. I sat down across from his desk. He had his reading glasses pushed up into his gray hair, and he folded his hands and waited, which is a thing lawyers are apparently trained to do, wait instead of filling silence the way the rest of us do. "I need you to pull the trust," I said, "the whole document, not the summary version you gave me in 2019, the actual deed. I want to see everything in it, especially anything to do with the keycard system and access to the building." Something shifted behind his eyes, small, the way a man's face changes when a question lands somewhere he wasn't expecting it to land. "This have to do with Founders Day?" I looked at him. "You heard about that. Your mother mentioned there'd been some kind of mix-up with the doors." He said mix-up carefully, like he was quoting her exact word back to me so I'd know exactly how small she'd made it sound. She didn't go into detail. "It wasn't a mix-up," I said, and I set the folder on his desk, unopened, my hand resting flat on top of it. I was locked out of my own building for 30 minutes while my sister met privately inside with her husband and an appraiser. The real spare key never left my mother's purse. But there's a second key now, a duplicate, cut 6 weeks before the festival, picked up in person by Valerie, signed for with her own name. I have the sign-out log. I have the key card report showing 9 denied entries against my card during those 30 minutes. What I don't have is an answer to whether any of that actually means something under what my grandmother wrote. That's why I'm here. He didn't touch the folder right away. He sat back in his chair for a second, and something in his face had gone very still. The particular stillness of a man doing math in his head that he already suspects he won't like the answer to. "Nicole," he said slowly, "how much do you actually know about what's in that deed? The full version, not the parts I walked you through at the funeral." "Apparently not enough," I said. "I know I'm custodian. I know that's supposed to mean something about sales and leases needing my approval. Beyond that, I've never had a reason to read the fine print. I trusted my grandmother wrote something fair, and I trusted my family to follow it." He nodded slowly, and then he got up, went to the tall file cabinet against the wall, and pulled a folder so thick it needed both hands to carry it back to the desk. Hamilton Hall Heritage Trust, the label read, in handwriting I recognized even from across the desk, because it was the same handwriting on half the folders in our own archive room. my grandmother's hand. She was specific, Barber said, sitting back down, thumbing through pages until he found the section he wanted. More specific than most people are when they set up something like this. She didn't just want you running the place day to day, she wanted you protected while you did it. He turned the folder around so I could see the page myself, a dense block of legal language with a clause circled in pencil, old pencil, faded enough that it had clearly been circled years ago and left that way. "Read it to me," I said. "Please. I want to hear it the way you'd explain it to someone who isn't a lawyer." He nodded, put his glasses down onto his nose properly, and read. "The building has a county-mandated card system, the SentryGate installation from 2020, and every lockdown that system triggers gets logged automatically. No way around it, because the county required that logging as a condition of the historic preservation grant that paid for half the install. My grandmother had written straight into the trust that if that log ever showed a trustee or any family member acting on the family's behalf using that system to lock the sitting custodian out of the building without the board having approved a reason for it first, that person doesn't just get a stern conversation at the next meeting. They forfeit their trustee seat," Barber said, looking up at me over his glasses. "Automatically. Not a vote the board has to take, not a discussion. It's written as a self-executing clause, and any financial interest that person might have in a transaction connected to that lockout forfeits with it. Full authority over any sale or lease reverts to you alone, the moment the log proves the lockout happened without board approval." I sat very still. I did not cry. I'd expected something, some kind of language protecting my job, my role, maybe my paycheck. I hadn't expected my grandmother to have built a trapdoor into the floor of this family, one that had been sitting there for 11 years, waiting for exactly this. "She knew," I said quietly. "She knew someone might try this someday. She knew people," Barber said, and there was something gentle in how he said it, almost sad. "She used to tell me, back when we were drafting this, that the hall would outlive whatever love the family had left for it. And she wanted the building protected from that day, even if she couldn't be here to protect it herself." He closed the big folder halfway, and then he stopped, his hand resting on top of it, and he looked at me differently, like he'd just remembered something. "There's one more thing," he said. "I should have given this to you years ago. I kept telling myself the right moment would come along on its own, and it never quite did, and now I think this might be it." He got up again, went to a different drawer this time, a locked one, and came back with a plain envelope yellowed slightly at the edges, my name written across the front in handwriting I would have known anywhere, even after 7 years without seeing it. "Nicole." "She wrote this the same week we finalized the trust in 2015, he said, setting it in front of me. "Told me to hold on to it and give it to you if the day ever came that you needed to understand why she built it the way she did. I've been carrying that instruction around for 11 years, Nicole. I think this is the day." I looked at the envelope for a long moment before I picked it up. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me a little, given everything. I opened it slowly, careful with the old paper, and unfolded a single page covered in my grandmother's handwriting, a little shakier than I remembered it from birthday cards, but unmistakably hers. I read it there in his office, with him sitting quietly across from me, giving me the same courtesy of silence he'd given himself a few minutes earlier. She'd written that she built the hall with her own husband's hands back in 1968, out of a building that used to hold Grange meetings and church suppers and wedding dances for half the county, and that she never once, not for a single day of running it, thought of it as something to be sold. She wrote that she loved all her grandchildren the same, but that love and trust aren't always the same thing, and that she'd watched enough of this family's habits over enough years to know that whoever inherited the keys to that building would need something sturdier than good intentions standing behind them. She wrote my name at the end, not just at the top, and under it, in a hand that pressed a little harder into the page than the rest of the letter, she'd written, "Keep the doors open to whoever you decide deserves them, and to no one else." I folded the letter back along its original crease and held it in my lap for a moment. She trusted you, Barbara said quietly. More than she trusted the rest of them, if I'm being honest, and I don't say that lightly, because I sat in rooms with your mother and your sister plenty of times over the years, too. I need this clause to hold up, I said. Not just for me, for her. If this is real, if this is actually written the way you just read it to me, then what happened at that festival isn't a family argument anymore. It's something the board has to answer for. On the record, the way she set it up 11 years ago. It'll hold, Barbara said. The language is clean. But Nicole, I have to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer it. Do you have any idea yet why they wanted you out of that building for those 30 minutes? What exactly they were doing in there? I thought about Danny standing in the main hall so easily, hands in his pockets, like the room already belonged to him. I thought about the word appraiser and how quickly Valerie had reached for it, like she'd rehearsed saying it out loud. Not yet, I said, but I intend to find out. And when I do, I'm going to have every piece of it laid out clean before I say a single word to any of them. Barbara nodded slowly, closed the thick folder in front of him, and slid a copy of the clause across the desk toward me, along with the letter, like he was handing both of them over to someone he finally trusted to carry them the rest of the way. I called Robin from the truck before I even pulled out of Barbara's parking lot, because I didn't want to hold everything I'd just learned by myself for one more hour. I need help with something, I said. And I need you to not ask me to explain the whole thing over the phone, because I don't think I can do it twice today. I'm at the hall, she said. Come here. I'll put the coffee on. She had the office lights on when I got there, and the moment she saw my face, she didn't ask what happened at the lawyer's. She just pulled out the second chair at the desk and waited for me to sit down before she said anything at all. I told her everything. The forfeiture clause, the letter, my grandmother's handwriting pressing into the page on the word deserves. Robin didn't say a word until I was finished. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand once, hard, and let go. Okay, she said. So we know the how. Locking you out, the duplicate key, all of it. That part's done, that part's proven. What we don't know yet is the why. Why Danny? Why now? An appraiser, I said. That's the word Valerie used. You don't bring in an appraiser unless somebody's already decided to sell something. Robin was already turning to the computer. County Recorder's Office has everything online now, deeds, liens, judgments. If Danny's company has any paper trail at all, it'll be searchable. She typed Roman Riverside Development LLC into the search field and hit enter. And we both sat there watching the little loading wheel spin like it had something to say. It did. The first result was a notice of lien filed against the company in the fall of 2024, out of a project down along the river, a mixed development that from the filing description alone sounded like it had been supposed to be condominiums and retail space and never got past the foundation work. Underneath that lien were 3 more, a contractor claim, a materials supplier claim, and one from a bank that made my stomach turn just reading the dollar figure attached to it. Robin scrolled slowly so I could read every line. He's underwater, she said quietly. Not a little underwater. This is a company that's been treading water for almost 2 years. And Valerie married into it, I said. Valerie married into it, Robin agreed, and Valerie's a licensed broker. She'd know exactly what a failing development company needs more than anything else in the world right now. Land, I said. Land it doesn't have to build from scratch. Land with a building already standing on it, in a good location, that somebody's willing to sell cheap to family. Robin sat back in her chair and looked at me for a long moment. You know what this means? If she sold him the hall, she wasn't doing her husband a favor. She was doing herself one. A commission on top of it, probably, and a rescue for the family business at the same time. 2 birds. I hadn't let myself think about the commission yet. Hadn't let myself go that far down the road, because some small, stupid part of me had still been holding on to the idea that maybe this was about family loyalty gone wrong instead of money, plain and simple. Sitting there with those lean filings glowing on the screen, that last little bit of doubt just went quiet. "I need to see the listing," I said. "If she's brokering this, there's paperwork somewhere. A licensed agent doesn't just shake hands on something this size. There's an agreement, there's a file, there's a number." "She wouldn't keep that here," Robin said. "No," I agreed, "but my mother's been storing board paperwork in the archive room for years because she doesn't trust the cloud storage system I switched us to. If Valerie needed her to sign anything or needed a place to leave something where nobody but family ever goes, that room's exactly where she'd put it." The archive room sits at the back of the hall, past the kitchen, in what used to be a coat closet back when this building still held Grange suppers instead of wedding receptions. It's narrow and it smells like old paper and the cedar my grandmother used to line the shelves with, and I hadn't been in there in probably 4 months, because most of what's in there is decades old and none of it needed my attention. Robin came with me, and we didn't say much walking back there, just the sound of our shoes on the wood floor and the hallway light buzzing over our heads the way it's needed replacing since spring. I started at the back corner where my mother keeps the newer folders, the ones from the last few years of board business, because if anything recent had been tucked away in here, that's where it would be. Robin took the shelf across from me and worked from the other end. It took maybe 10 minutes of quiet searching, folder after folder of grant paperwork and old meeting minutes and insurance renewals, before my hand landed on a manila folder that didn't have a label at all, just a blank tab, shoved behind a thicker folder like somebody had wanted it close but not visible. I pulled it out and opened it right there, standing in that narrow room with the cedar smell all around me. And Robin came and stood at my shoulder so we could read it together. It was a listing agreement. Exclusive right to sell. The kind of language that means one broker and one broker only gets to represent the property, no matter who else might come along wanting to make an offer. The property address was right there in black print. The hall's address. Our address. The one I'd had memorized since I was a kid, riding my bike past it before I ever worked a single day inside these walls. And the broker named on that agreement, signed in her own handwriting, dated back in the spring, months before Founders Day, was Valerie. She dated this before the lockout, I said, my voice coming out flatter than I expected it to. Months before. She wasn't scrambling to figure out a sale after some appraiser got interested. She built the whole thing first and then found a reason to get me out of the building so nobody would catch her showing it. Robin leaned in closer to read the commission line, and when she found it, she went quiet for a second before she read the number out loud, like she needed to hear herself say it to believe it. $96,000, she said. That's her cut. If this closes at whatever price they've got written down for it. I turned the page. There it was, a sale price scrawled in pencil on a separate attached sheet, $2.4 million, next to a note in the margin that I recognized as my mother's handwriting, not Valerie's, 3 words only. Talk to Nicole after, not before. After. Like I was a formality to be handled once the real decisions were already made, a signature to collect on the back end instead of the person whose whole life had been built inside that building's walls since I was 22 years old. I did not cry standing in that archive room. I want to be clear about that because there was a version of that moment where anybody would have understood if I had. I just felt something in my chest go very still and very cold, the way a room goes quiet right before a storm actually arrives. And I closed the folder carefully, the way you'd close something you intend to open again very soon in front of people who need to see it. "What do you want to do with this?" Robin asked. "Nothing yet," I said. "Not tonight. Not this week." She looked at me like she wasn't sure she'd heard me right. "Nicole, this is everything. The lockout, the duplicate key, the invoice, and now this. You've got the whole thing laid out." "I've got the whole thing laid out for me," I said. "That's not the same as having it laid out for the board. And it's definitely not the same as having it laid out in a room where my mother and my sister can't quietly walk it back into some story about miscommunication before anyone with actual authority ever hears the real version." I slid the folder into my bag, careful, like it was something breakable. Barber told me the deed language is clean. It holds up on its own, without me saying a single angry word to anybody. That means I don't need to confront her. I don't need to corner Carol in the kitchen and make her explain that note in the margin. All I need to do is wait for the moment when everyone who matters is already in the same room, and put every piece of this in front of them at once, in an order they can't argue with. Robin was quiet for a second, and then she nodded slowly, the way she does when she's decided I'm right, even if part of her wanted the satisfaction of watching me do it sooner. "The closing celebration," she said. "They're planning to have it here, in the hall, once the sale goes through." "They're planning to have it here," I agreed, because it never occurred to either of them that I'd figure any of this out before that day came. I looked around that narrow room one more time, at the cedar shelves my grandmother built with her own hands before either of us was born, at the folder now sitting heavy in my bag, and something in me settled into place, quiet and certain, the way water finds its level without anybody having to tell it to. So that's where I'll be standing when I do. I drove out to Stevens Lock and Security on a Tuesday morning, because Tuesday mornings are quiet there, and I didn't want an audience for what I was about to ask. Robin came with me. She always comes with me now when it matters. The shop sits off Route 71, a squat brick building with a bell over the door that still rings the old-fashioned way, on a spring, not a chip. Roger Stevens has run that counter for longer than I've been alive. 52 years old, and most of them spent behind that same glass case full of deadbolts and padlocks nobody buys anymore because everybody wants the electronic kind now. He knew me the second I walked in. "Nicole Hamilton," he said. Like my name was a fact he was pleased to confirm. "Haven't seen you in here since you had me rekey the side door after that storm took the frame out." "That was 2 winters ago," I said. "Feels like yesterday." He wiped his hands on a rag, even though I hadn't seen him touch anything. An old habit, I think. Something to do while he waits to find out why someone's standing in front of him. "What can I do for you?" I set a folder on the counter between us, closed, my hand flat on top of it the way you'd hold down a hand of cards before you're ready to show them. "I need to ask you about a duplicate key card for the hall. I think it was cut here sometime this year." Something moved behind his eyes, quick, there and gone. Not surprise, exactly. More like a man watching a bill finally come due that he'd known was coming. "I figured somebody might come ask me about that eventually," he said. Robin and I exchanged a look, and I didn't say anything, just waited, because in my experience, the fastest way to get a careful man talking is to give him room to fill the silence himself. "We don't cut those cards without a work order," Roger said. "Not the Sentry Gate ones. County makes us log every single one. Chip number, requesting party, date, signature. It's not like the old days when I could stamp a blank in the back for anybody with $5 and a smile." "I know," I said. "I'm the primary administrator on the system. I pulled the export from our side already. I have the report. Then you already know it wasn't your name on it. I know whose card it was billed to," I said. "I don't know whose hands actually held the pen when somebody signed for picking it up." Roger looked at me for a second like he was deciding something, and then he turned and walked into the back room without another word, and I heard a file drawer roll open, the metal kind that sticks a little on the left side, the sound carrying clean through the thin wall. He came back with a green ledger book, the old-fashioned kind, spiral bound, the county digital system, running alongside it because Roger doesn't trust computers any further than he can see them, which is honestly a philosophy I was starting to have some sympathy for. He opened it to a page near the back and turned it around so I could read it myself instead of just taking his word for it. The work order was dated, the way I already knew it would be, weeks before Founders Day. Billing name, Carol Hamilton. Card number matching the last 4 digits. Barber's document request had already pulled off the vendor invoice. That part I'd expected. That part wasn't the reason my chest went tight standing at that counter. It was the line below it. In-person pickup, the ledger read, and a signature line beside it, The kind Roger has customers sign so there's a paper trail proving the actual physical card left his shop in a specific set of hands. Not just that somebody's card number got charged for it over the phone. The signature was Valerie's. Her full name, her actual handwriting. The same loop on the capital letter I'd seen 1,000 times on birthday cards and old school permission slips, right there under a date and a timestamp that put her standing at this very counter, alone, collecting a card that wasn't hers to collect. She came in herself, I said. It wasn't a question. She did, Roger said. I remember because she paid the rush fee, wanted it same day instead of the standard 3, and she was, I don't know, chatty about it in a way that struck me a little odd at the time. Told me it was for her mother, that Carol's hands had been giving her trouble lately and she was just picking it up as a favor. He shook his head slowly. I didn't think much of it. People pick things up for their parents all the time. It's only now, you standing here asking, that it strikes me as the kind of thing somebody says when they want a reason ready in their back pocket in case anybody ever asks. I did not respond to that right away. I just looked at the signature a while longer, at the ordinary, unremarkable way she'd signed her own name to something she must have known. Even then, she'd need to explain away one day. "Can I get a copy of this page?" I asked. "You're the custodian on that system," Roger said. "County paperwork lists you as the authorized contact for anything Sentrygate related. Has for years." I don't see why I couldn't. He was already turning toward the little copier behind the counter, the one that hums for a full 10 seconds before it does anything useful. "Between you and me, Nicole, I always liked your grandmother. She used to bring cider down here every fall, whole jugs of it. Didn't want anything for it. Just liked knowing the people who kept her building running were taken care of, too." He fed the ledger page through the machine, careful, like it mattered to him that it come out straight. "If somebody's trying to walk off with what she built, I'm not going to be the reason they get away clean." He handed me the copy, warm still from the machine, and I folded it once and slid it into the folder with everything else, the report, the invoice, the listing agreement, and now this. 4 separate pieces of paper that had never once, until this morning, all lived in the same place at the same time. Robin didn't say anything until we were back in the truck, sitting in the gravel lot with the engine still off. "That's 4, she said quietly. 4 things, Nicole. The log that shows you got locked out. The invoice that shows who paid. Now this, that shows who actually walked in and signed for it with her own hand. And the listing agreement that shows why any of it was worth doing in the first place. I know," I said. "You could take this to Barber today. Right now. You don't have to wait for some party." I sat there for a second with my hands on the wheel, not turning the key yet, thinking about my grandmother's letter folded in my desk drawer back at the hall. The line she'd pressed harder into the page than any other. "Keep the doors open to whoever you decide deserves them, and to no one else." "If I go to Barber today," I said, "he calls an emergency board session. Greg convenes it, everybody scrambles, my mother gets 48 hours notice to build some story before anybody official ever hears mine. She's had practice. She'll find an angle." I finally turned the key. I don't want an angle. I want a room, everyone in the same room at the same time hearing it laid out once in an order they can't talk their way around afterward. "The closing celebration," Robin said. "The closing celebration," I agreed. She was quiet for a mile or two, watching the fields go by outside the window, and then she said, "Careful," the way she gets when she's about to say something she thinks I might not want to hear. "You know, once you do this, there's no undoing it. Whatever happens to your mother's seat, to Valerie's license, to Danny's whole business, that's not something you can walk back a year from now if the guilt gets loud." "I'm not doing this because I want to punish anybody," I said, and I meant it. Or at least I meant it as much as a person can mean something like that while still feeling the old flint scrape of it somewhere under her ribs. I'm doing it because my grandmother built a lock into that deed for exactly this reason, 11 years before any of us even knew we'd need it. And if I don't use it now, After everything, then what was the point of her ever building it in the first place? We didn't say much the rest of the drive back into Ottawa. When we pulled up outside the hall, there was a car in the lot I recognized as my mother's, and through the front window, I could see her standing in the main hall with a clipboard, talking to a woman I didn't know, gesturing at the far wall like she was already picturing something hanging there that wasn't there yet. My phone buzzed in my pocket before I even had the door open. A text from Valerie, the first one she'd sent me in nearly 3 weeks, since Founders Day, since the 30 minutes, since all of it. Family meeting Sunday, it read. Closing celebration set for 4 months out. Mom wants everyone there. Should be a good day for the family. I read it twice, standing there in the parking lot with the folder still warm against my side from the copier at Roger's shop. 4 pieces of paper that were about to turn her good day into something else entirely. I did not respond right away. I just put the phone back in my pocket, looked up at the hall, at the windows my grandmother had picked out the glass for herself back in 1968, and started walking toward the door like a woman who already knew exactly what she was going to do with 4 months and every single day of it. I did not text her back that night. I sat with my phone on the kitchen counter, the screen gone dark, and I let 2 whole hours pass before I finally typed 3 words. I'll be there. Nothing more. No exclamation point, no warmth, nothing for her to hold up later and say, see, she was fine with it, she seemed fine. Sunday came clear and a little too warm for the season, and I drove out to my parents' house with the folder locked in my glove compartment, because some part of me didn't trust it sitting anywhere I couldn't see it. Carol had the good tablecloth out, the cream one with the scalloped edge that only comes out for company or for occasions she's decided are worth documenting. Danny's truck was already in the driveway when I pulled up, parked at an angle like he owned the space, and through the front window I could see him standing in the living room in a blazer he definitely didn't need for a Sunday family lunch, laughing at something with his hand on my father's shoulder. William opened the door before I even knocked. He looked at me for a second longer than a simple hello requires, and something in his face flickered, like he wanted to say something and then decided against it. The way he'd been deciding against things for months now. Nicole, he said, good to see you. Dad. I stepped past him into the front hall and I could hear Valerie's voice from the kitchen, bright and rehearsed, the voice she uses when she's already decided how a conversation is going to go and just needs everyone else to catch up to the script. Carol had lunch laid out like a celebration that hadn't technically happened yet. Chicken and the good rolls, and a bottle of wine already open and breathing on the counter. She hugged me the second she saw me, quick and tight. The kind of hug that's more about being seen giving it than about the person receiving it. There she is, Carol said. Come sit. We were just talking about the timeline. I sat. I ate. I said the things a person says at a table like that, passed the rolls, asked Danny how his kids were doing, and the whole time I kept one hand resting near my bag on the floor, the folder inside it, 4 pieces of paper that were going to end this exact performance eventually, just not today. Valerie waited until we were most of the way through the meal to bring it up properly, setting her fork down with a little click against the plate like she was calling a meeting to order. So we wanted everyone together, she said, because Danny's team has the financing locked in now and the appraisal came back even better than we hoped. 2.4. She said the number like it was a gift she was handing across the table. The board's on board, obviously. Mom's seat carries a lot of weight there. And once everything closes, we're thinking a big celebration right here in Ottawa. At the hall, actually. One last event before it changes hands. One last event, I repeated. Well, it won't be gone, Valerie said quickly, catching something in my tone she didn't quite know how to read yet. Danny's group has beautiful plans for it. Really tasteful. It'll still be a building people love. It'll just finally be generating something instead of bleeding money every year on upkeep grants and folding chairs. Danny leaned forward, warming to his subject the way men like him always do when they think they've found an audience. The riverfront angle is what makes this one different from anything I've tried before, he said. Mixed use, retail on the ground floor, residential above. Ottawa doesn't have anything like it yet. This building's got the bones for it, and the location can't be beat. I kept my face still. I already knew, from the folder in my bag, exactly what he'd tried before, and exactly how it had gone. "That's a big vision," I said, and I meant it to sound neutral, and mostly it did. "It is," Carol said, jumping in before Danny could keep talking, the way she does when she wants to steer a conversation somewhere specific. "And Nicole, honestly, this takes so much off your plate. You've been running yourself ragged, keeping that place afloat on grant money and rental fees for years. This is a chance to finally breathe a little." "I don't feel ragged," I said. "You know what I mean." Carol waved a hand like the specifics didn't matter. "The point is, everyone wins here. Danny gets his project. Valerie gets to use her expertise for something that actually matters to the family for once, instead of some stranger's house closing, and you get your life back." I did not respond to that right away. I picked up my glass and took a slow sip of water instead, giving myself the 2 or 3 seconds I needed to keep my voice level. "What does expertise mean exactly?" I asked, looking at Valerie. "Are you brokering this?" Something crossed her face. Quick, gone almost as fast as it came, and I watched her decide how much to say. "I'm helping coordinate," she said, "making sure everything's handled professionally instead of leaving it to some outside agent who doesn't understand what this place means to us." "That's generous of you," I said. "It's family," she said, like that answered the question I'd actually asked. William hadn't said much through any of it, just moved his food around his plate, and once, when Carol wasn't looking, I caught him glance at me across the table, something apologetic in it that he still didn't have the nerve to put into words. I filed that look away too, the same way I'd been filing everything else these past few months, quiet and careful, not because I needed it for what was coming, but because some part of me wanted to remember, later, that at least one person at that table had looked uncomfortable. "So we'll plan the celebration for around 4 months out," Valerie said, moving briskly past the moment, already back to her clipboard voice. "Gives Danny's team time to finalize permits. Gives us time to plan something nice. Mom wants it at the hall, obviously. Full circle." "Full circle," I said. "You'll help coordinate the space, won't you?" Carol asked. And there was something almost sweet in the way she asked it, like she genuinely believed she was doing me a kindness by including me in the party for the thing that would end my life's work. "You know that building better than anyone." "I do," I said. "I'll help coordinate the space." I meant that more literally than any of them understood, and I let myself feel, just for a second, the particular quiet satisfaction of saying something completely true that would land completely differently once they finally understood it. I left before dessert, told them I had a rental walkthrough that evening, which wasn't a lie, just not the whole reason I wanted to be back in my car. Robin was waiting for me at the hall office when I got there, laptop already open on the desk, 2 mugs of coffee going cold beside her because she'd made them an hour before I actually arrived. "How was it?" she asked. "Educational," I said, dropping my bag and pulling out a chair. Danny gave a whole speech about his vision for the riverfront. Mixed use, retail on the ground floor, big plans. "Big plans," Robin repeated, and there was something dry in the way she said it that told me she already had something to show me. She turned the laptop around. I spent the afternoon in the county recorder's database. Public record, anybody can pull it. You just have to know what to search. On the screen was a list of filings, dates going back to 2024, a property address down by the river I didn't recognize, and a name I did. Roman Riverside Development, LLC. "He tried something like this before," Robin said. 2 years ago, bigger parcel closer to the water. Broke ground, got about a third of the way through construction, and then it just stopped. There's a materials lien here from a supplier who never got paid. There's a mechanics lien from the contractor. There's a filing from the bank that financed it, some kind of default notice. She scrolled slowly so I could read each one. It's all still open. None of it ever got resolved. His company's been sitting on this debt for 2 years. I stared at the screen for a long moment, at the neat rows of numbers and dates that added up to something Danny had stood in my parents' living room and never once mentioned. "So this isn't a new venture for him," I said quietly. "This is a man trying to climb out of a hole with our building." "Looks that way," Robin said. I thought about Valerie's $96,000, about the note in Carol's handwriting. Talked to Nicole after, not before. And I understood something then that I hadn't quite let myself see clearly until that moment. This wasn't just Valerie wanting to feel important or Carol wanting to make her older daughter's life easier. This was a rescue plan, dressed up as a family gift, with my grandmother's building as the thing being thrown to a drowning man. "Print that," I said. "All of it." Robin was already reaching for the printer. I gathered the pages while they were still warm, 5 more sheets to go into the folder now sitting on my desk, and I sat there for a minute just looking at the small, growing stack of it, the report, the invoice, the sign-out log, the listing agreement, and now this. Truth doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, slow, one document at a time, and you don't always know you're building a case until you look down one day and realize you're holding the whole thing in your hands. 4 months, Robin said, watching me straighten the pages into order. "You've got 4 months before that party." "I know," I said. "I'm going to use every single day of it." I did not call Kenneth Barber's office. I drove there, the Tuesday after the family lunch, and I brought the folder with me instead of leaving it in the glove compartment, because some things you do not trust to an envelope. His office sat above the hardware store on the square, up a narrow staircase with a rail that wobbled if you leaned on it, and his secretary waved me straight back because I'd called ahead that morning, told her only that it concerned the hall, nothing more. Barber stood when I came in, a tall man going soft in the middle, reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, and he shook my hand the way he always had, like I was still the 25-year-old who'd come to him after my grandmother's funeral, asking what a custodian actually was. "Nicole," he gestured at the chair across from his desk. "I heard there's a sale in the works. Your mother's excited about it." "I imagine she is," I said, and I sat down and I set the folder on the edge of his desk without opening it yet. "Before we get to that, I need you to look at the deed. The full thing. Not the summary my grandmother's lawyer gave the family at the reading, the actual language." Something in his face changed, some old instinct waking up. He drafted that deed himself back in 2015, sat across a table from Janet Hamilton while she told him exactly what she wanted it to do, and I watched him understand before I said another word that I hadn't come here about a sale at all. "Tell me what happened," he said. So I told him. Founders Day, the 30 minutes, the Sentrygate report on my laptop screen, showing my own card denied 3 times running, while my sisters showed a badge in at the very same door. The duplicate cut at Stephen's Lock and Security, billed to my mother's card, signed for in Valerie's own hand in a ledger Roger Stevens kept because he didn't like being made part of something he hadn't agreed to. The listing agreement in the archive room, her name typed in as broker, where no broker should have been named at all. Danny's company, 2 years deep in debt from a project down by the river that never made it out of the ground. Barber listened without writing anything down, which told me he was the kind of man who remembers everything the first time. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he pulled a thick binder off the shelf behind him. The trust itself, tabs worn soft at the edges from years of use, and he opened it to a page near the back that had clearly been read before, by him, if by no one else. "Your grandmother added this in 2015, he said, running a finger down the margin. "Before she even named you successor custodian formally, 2 years before that amendment. She sat right where you're sitting, and she told me she wanted a lock built into the paper itself, something nobody could talk their way around later. I asked her who she thought would ever try something like that. He looked up at me. She said she didn't know yet. She just knew somebody eventually would, and she wanted the building to already know what to do about it before it happened." "What does it say?" I asked, even though some part of me could already feel the shape of it coming. He read it to me slowly, the actual language, dense with the kind of phrasing lawyers use so that nothing can slip out sideways later, but the meaning under it was plain enough. Any trustee, any family member with standing under the trust who used the county's keycard system to deny the sitting custodian access to the hall without cause approved in advance by the board forfeited their trustee seat automatically the moment it was documented, and forfeited any financial interest in whatever transaction they'd used that lockout to protect. Full authority over any sale or lease reverted in that same moment to the custodian alone. I sat very still while he read it. I'd worked in that building for 10 years, known I was custodian, known there was a trust behind the word, and never once had a reason to go looking in the boilerplate for a clause built for exactly this, because you don't go looking for a lock until someone tries the door. She built this 11 years before Founders Day, I said, mostly to myself. She built a great many things before anyone needed them, Barber said. That was rather her whole approach to life, as I understood her. He closed the binder halfway, kept his finger on the page. Nicole, I want to be clear with you about what this means procedurally, because it isn't a formality. If the board sees documentation that satisfies this clause, it isn't a vote on whether to punish your mother. It's automatic. The seat is already forfeited the moment the proof is accepted as valid. The vote is just the board acknowledging what the deed already did. Good, I said. Then I want them to acknowledge it in a room where everyone's already gathered, and not one where I have to go looking for people first. He studied me for a second, the way he probably studied documents, looking for the seam that didn't quite match. You mean the closing celebration? I mean the closing celebration. I finally opened the folder, laid the 4 pieces of paper out on his desk in order, the report first, then the invoice, then the sign-out log, then the listing agreement, the way I'd laid them out for myself a dozen times already in the quiet of my own office. You're going to be there anyway. You're the one signing off on the closing documents. Nobody will think it's strange that Kenneth Barber shows up to a party where a $2.4 million sale is closing. He looked down at the 4 pages for a long moment, and I watched him do the math on it, the same math I'd already done. You want me to read the clause aloud, in front of the board, in front of your family. I want you to read it exactly like you just read it to me, I said. And then I want to hand Greg Simmons these 4 pieces of paper myself, in the same room, so nobody has 4 months to build a story around it first. He was quiet again, and I could see the caution in him, the part of a career spent making sure nothing moved faster than the paper allowed. If I do this at a family celebration instead of a called board session, your mother's attorney, if she gets one, could argue the setting was designed to humiliate rather than to inform. It was designed so that nobody in that family gets 48 hours notice to build an angle before the board hears the truth, I said. I'm not hiding anything from anyone. I'm handing you documents that already exist in front of the people they concern, at a gathering they themselves chose to hold in my building. If that's uncomfortable for them, that discomfort isn't mine to manage. Something almost like a smile crossed his face, brief, gone as fast as it came. Your grandmother used to say something very close to that, he said, about discomfort not being hers to manage. He closed the binder the rest of the way, set his hand flat on top of it like he was settling something. All right, I'll be there regardless. For the closing paperwork, I'll bring the deed. If Greg Simmons asks me a direct question about the forfeiture clause in front of the board, I'll answer it fully and accurately, because that's my obligation as counsel to this trust, sale or no sale. He looked at me carefully. But Nicole, I want you to understand, once I read that clause aloud in front of the board with this documentation in hand, there's no version of that afternoon where it stays a party. You understand that? I understand that, I said, and I found I meant it steadier than I expected to. No flint scraping under my ribs this time, just a kind of level quiet I hadn't felt in months. I'm not asking you to make it stay a party. I'm asking you to make sure it ends the way the deed already says it has to. He nodded slowly, And then he reached for a legal pad and started making notes in that small, careful handwriting lawyers use when they've decided to take something seriously. And I sat there and watched him work for a minute. 4 pieces of paper and a lawyer's binder between us. Everything that was going to matter, already sitting right there on the desk, in plain sight, waiting on nothing now but the date already circled on my calendar back at the hall. I stood to go, and at the door I stopped and looked back at him. "Thank you," I said, "for drafting it the way she wanted, for not talking her out of it." "She wasn't the kind of woman you talked out of things," Barber said, and there was something almost fond in it. She just wanted to make sure the building could stand up for itself, long after she couldn't. I walked back down the wobbling staircase and out onto the square, and the afternoon was bright and ordinary. People going in and out of the hardware store like nothing in the world had shifted, and I got in my car and sat there for a moment before starting the engine, thinking about my grandmother sitting in that same office 11 years ago, building a lock for a door she'd never lived to see anyone try. I drove back to the hall with the folder on the passenger seat, and when I let myself in the front door, the afternoon light was coming through the windows. She'd picked the glass for herself, and I stood in the middle of the empty hall for a second, just listening to the quiet of a building that still, for now, belonged to whoever the deed said it belonged to. The 4 months went by faster than I expected, and slower, too. The way time does when you're carrying something heavy and just trying not to set it down before you reach the place you're taking it. I coordinated the space the way I'd promised. I hung the string lights myself, the same ones we used for the anniversary parties Janet used to throw, and I set up the long tables under the west windows where the afternoon light comes in gold around 4 o'clock. I did all of it the way I'd do it for anyone renting the hall for anything, because that was true, and because I wanted the room to look exactly like what it was, a building that still knew how to hold people well, right up until the moment it stopped holding some of them at all. Robin came early to help me set the folder aside where I could reach it, tucked into a canvas bag under the sound booth table, 5 documents in order, the report on top. "You good?" she asked. Not really a question. "I'm good," I said, and I meant it. Steady in a way I hadn't expected to feel walking into this. By 6, the hall was full. Danny's business partners in blazers that cost more than my monthly rent budget for the building. Carol in a green dress she'd bought for the occasion, moving through the room like she'd already signed something historic. Valerie at the head table with a folder of her own. Glossy printouts of the riverfront renderings Danny's team had mocked up. Mixed retail below, apartments above. A building that would rise where our building's parking lot currently sat, because that had been part of the deal, too. More land than anyone in the family had bothered to mention to me outright. William found me near the drink table before things really got going. "You did a beautiful job with the room," he said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite comfortable. Hadn't been comfortable in months, if I was honest, ever since Founders Day, though he'd never once said why. "Thank you," I said, and I let it sit there, because I wasn't going to make it easier for him to feel good about being here. Kenneth Barber arrived at 6:30, right on schedule, in the same gray suit he wears to every closing, his leather binder under one arm like it was any ordinary Tuesday. Carol lit up when she saw him. "Kenneth, thank you for coming. I know this isn't really your kind of party." "I go where the paperwork goes," he said, and he caught my eye across the room for just a second, and I gave him nothing back but a small nod, the kind 2 professionals give each other before a meeting starts. Greg Simmons was already there, had been for 20 minutes, standing near the archive room door with a glass of sparkling water he wasn't drinking, watching the room, the careful way a board chair watches a room he suspects is about to become his problem. I'd called him 2 days before, told him only that I needed him at the closing celebration and that I needed him sober and paying attention, and he hadn't asked me why, which told me he already sensed something was coming even if he didn't know its shape. Danny stood up around 7, tapped his glass with a fork, and the room quieted for him. "I want to thank the Hamilton family," he said, for trusting me with something this important. This building has been the heart of this town for almost 60 years, and what we're building next to it is going to make sure that heart keeps beating for 60 more. Applause. Carol's eyes were wet. Valerie was beaming at him the way you beam at someone you've just saved. I did not clap. I stood near the sound booth with my hand resting on the strap of the canvas bag, and I waited. When the toast finished and the room settled back into its low hum of conversation, I walked over to Greg Simmons, and I said his name quietly enough that only he and Barber, who drifted close, could hear it. "Greg, I need 5 minutes with the board, right now, before anyone signs anything tonight." He looked at me carefully. "Nicole, this isn't really the moment for board business. It's exactly the moment," I said, "and it can't wait until Monday." Something in my voice must have carried, because he didn't argue again. He looked at Barber, and Barber gave him a small nod, the same nod I'd given him minutes before, and that was enough. I asked Carol and Valerie to join us near the head table, told them it concerned the closing paperwork, which was true. Danny came too because he wasn't about to be left out of anything involving his own $2.4 million. William trailed behind, quiet, the way he'd been quiet through all of it. I set the canvas bag on the table, and I took out the folder and I laid the 5 pages down one at a time. In the order I'd laid them out for myself so many times already, the keycard report first. On Founders Day, I said, I was locked out of this building for 30 minutes. My card was denied 3 times at the front door. I have the Sentry Gate report showing exactly when, and showing Valerie's card badging in at that same door, at that same time. Carol's face didn't change yet. Valerie's did, just slightly, a tightening around the eyes. I laid down the invoice next. This is the bill for a duplicate of the board spare, cut at Stevens Lock and Security, charged to my mother's card. Then the sign-out ledger. This is Roger Stevens' own log showing Valerie picked that duplicate up in person and signed for it herself. Then the listing agreement. And this names Valerie as the broker of record on the sale of this building, a $96,000 commission, never disclosed to this family or to this board. "Nicole," Carol started, and her voice had gone thin. "I don't know what you think this proves." "It doesn't need me to prove anything," I said. "Kenneth can explain what it proves. He wrote the language himself." Barber stepped forward and opened his binder to the tabbed page, and he read the forfeiture clause aloud, the same way he'd read it to me in his office, slow and precise, so that nobody in that small circle could later say they hadn't understood it. Any trustee who used the keycard system to deny the custodian entry without board-approved cause forfeited the seat automatically, forfeited any financial stake in the pending transaction, and the custodian's sale authority reverted whole. The room around us had gone quieter, guests noticing now, a ripple of attention moving toward the head table the way it does when something shifts in a crowd before anyone said a word about what. "This is documented," Barber said, closing the binder. "The report, the invoice, the ledger. It satisfies the clause on its face." Greg Simmons looked down at the 4 pages for a long moment, and then he looked up at Carol, and I watched something pass over his face that looked almost like sadness. "Carol, I have to call this to a vote right now with the documentation in front of me. I don't have a choice in the timing." He didn't. 2 other board members were close enough to the head table to be pulled in, and it took less than 5 minutes, standing right there under the string lights I'd hung myself, for the vote to happen. The sale was void. Carol's trustee seat was stripped, effective immediately. Full custodial and sale authority vested solely in me, the way the deed had always said it would if this exact thing was ever proven. Barber added one more thing, quiet but clear, meant for Valerie alone, though everyone close enough could hear it. I'll also be referring the undisclosed conflict of interest, the listing agreement naming you as broker without disclosure, to the state licensing board. That's a separate matter from the trust, but I have an obligation to report it. Valerie's face had gone rigid, her mouth open like she was about to argue a point she hadn't fully found yet. Carol was staring at the 4 pages on the table like they might rearrange themselves into something less true if she looked long enough. Danny had gone very still, his glass loose in his hand, and I understood, watching him, that he already knew exactly what this meant for him, faster than either of them did. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The papers had already said everything I needed said, and I stood there in the gold evening light of my grandmother's building, watching the whole arrangement come apart at the exact table where they'd built it. Carol found her voice first, and it wasn't remorse in it. Not yet. "This is a private family matter, Greg. You cannot let her turn a closing celebration into a tribunal. It stopped being private the day you used the system to lock your own daughter out of a county-regulated building," Greg said, and his voice had none of the softness it usually carried at these events. "I have a fiduciary obligation the second documentation like this is put in front of me. I don't get to decide its inconvenient timing." "I never touched that card," Carol said, and she looked at me instead of at him, like I was the one she needed to convince. "I don't even know how that system works, Nicole. You know that." "You don't have to know how it works," I said. "You just have to be the one who paid for it." I nodded toward the invoice still sitting on the table, her name printed plain across the top of it. "Roger Stevens runs his shop the old way. He writes down who picks up what and when in a paper ledger, because a computer system feels a little too fancy to him for a deadbolt business. I asked him for it back in April. He didn't hesitate handing it over. He said he figured somebody would ask, eventually." She looked down at the ledger like she could argue with her own signature if she stared at it hard enough. She couldn't. I watched her understand that in real time, the way you watch someone's face when the water finally reaches the part of the boat they'd convinced themselves was dry. Valerie found her footing faster than our mother did, which didn't surprise me. She'd always been the one who thought fastest under pressure, even when the thing she was thinking her way out of was true. This is absurd. I facilitated a sale that was good for this family. I found the buyer. I structured the terms. You should be thanking me instead of staging this. "You didn't disclose that you were the broker," I said. "You didn't disclose the commission. You didn't disclose that the buyer was your husband. Any one of those on its own is a conversation with the board. All 3 together is a conversation with the state licensing office, and Kenneth's already told you that's happening. It's a technicality," she said, and her voice had gone up half a register, the way it used to when we were kids, and she'd been caught doing something she'd decided in advance not to feel bad about. Everyone in this family knew Danny was the buyer. "I didn't," I said, "and I'm the one whose signature the deed actually requires." Danny hadn't said a word this whole time. He was standing a little apart from the rest of them, still holding that glass, and I watched him do a kind of math I recognized because I'd done a version of it myself 4 months ago, sitting in my car outside a hardware store with a folder on the passenger seat. He wasn't doing math about the family. He was doing math about payroll, about the note his company was already carrying from the riverfront project that never got built, about whatever numbers Robin and I had pulled off the county lien site back in April, the ones that told us exactly how deep that debt already ran before he ever set foot in Ottawa looking to buy our parking lot. I'd known for months what this deal meant to him. Standing there watching his face empty out, I understood he'd only just now started to know it too, in front of people. "Danny," Greg said, not unkindly, "the sale's void as of this vote. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you came here for tonight." "No," Danny said, quiet, and it was the first thing he'd said since his toast. "It really isn't." He set his glass down on the table, careful, like it was the only steady thing left in reach, and he walked toward the door without looking at Valerie, and 2 of the men in blazers peeled off from the crowd near the drink table and followed him out, already reaching for their phones before they'd cleared the doorway. I didn't feel triumphant watching him go. I felt the way you feel closing a ledger that finally balances. Nothing more dramatic than that. A column of numbers that had been wrong for months, finally sitting right. The room had gone very quiet around us, guests who'd drifted close enough to catch pieces of it, now pretending very hard to be interested in their drinks, in the string lights, in anything that wasn't four Hamiltons standing over a folder at the head table. Robin had come to stand near me at some point without my noticing, close enough that her shoulder almost touched mine, not saying anything, just there, the way she'd been there through every version of the last 4 months that hadn't made it into any folder. "Nicole," William said, and it was the first time he'd spoken since we'd all gathered at the table. He wasn't looking at Carol or at Valerie. He was looking at me, and there was something in his face I hadn't seen there in a long time, maybe not since Janet's funeral. "Can we talk? Not now. Not here." "Not here," I agreed. Because he was right about that much, and because whatever was in his face wasn't something I wanted an audience for either. "Call me tomorrow." He nodded once and stepped back, and I watched him not go to Carol's side, not go to Valerie's, just stand a little apart from both of them near the window, his hands in his pockets, looking older than I'd ever thought of him as looking. Kenneth Barber closed his binder and set it under his arm again, the same posture he'd walked in with, like the last 10 minutes hadn't happened at all, except that his eyes, when they met mine, had something steady and almost gentle in them. "I'll have the formal board resolution drafted by Monday," he said, pitched low, just for me and Greg. "The forfeiture takes effect from tonight's vote, but I want the paperwork clean, and I'll be filing the complaint with the licensing office this week, Nicole. That part isn't optional, and it isn't really mine to delay even if I wanted to." "I don't want you to delay it," I said. "I didn't think you would." He looked past me, at Carol, still standing there with her hand resting on the table's edge like she needed it to hold her up, and something crossed his face that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite satisfaction either. Just the flat recognition of a man who'd watched a lot of families come apart over paper and had stopped being surprised by which piece of paper finally did it. "I am sorry it landed the way it landed. I don't think Janet would have been sorry about the landing, just about needing to build the lock at all." Greg Simmons moved off to speak quietly with the 2 board members who'd been close enough to be pulled into the vote, and I watched the 3 of them huddle near the archive room door, heads bent, already talking through whatever came next on the trust's end, minutes to be typed up, a resolution to be filed, the machinery of an organization doing exactly what it existed to do. The rest of the party hadn't stopped. Not exactly. Somebody had turned the music back up a notch too high, the way people do when they want a room to feel normal again, faster than it's actually able to. But the shape of the evening had changed, and everyone in it could feel the difference, even if half of them didn't know the reason. Carol was still standing at the table when I finally looked back at her, staring down at the 4 pages like she was waiting for one of them to apologize to her instead of the other way around. "You planned this," she said, and it wasn't quite a question. "You've been planning this for months. I've been finding out the truth for months," I said. "There's a difference, even if it doesn't feel like one from where you're standing." She didn't answer that. Valerie had already turned away, was already moving toward the door in that same clipped, furious walk she used to do when we were teenagers, and she'd lost an argument she still believed she should have won. And Carol looked after her for a second, and then back at me, and then she picked up her purse off the back of her chair. The same purse that had held the board spare that whole afternoon back in April, while I stood locked outside my own building, and she walked out without saying anything else at all. I stood there a moment longer in the gold light coming through the west windows, the folder still open on the table, Robin's shoulder still steady against mine, and I watched the room slowly remember how to be a party again around the edges of where we stood, laughter picking back up near the bar, somebody's toast being finished off in a lower key than Danny's had been. Greg came back over eventually, his sparkling water still untouched in his hand. "I'll need you at the formal session Monday," he said, "to make it official. Sign the paperwork that puts the custodial authority back where the deed always said it belonged." "I'll be there," I said, and I looked around the hall, at the string lights I'd hung myself, at the tables under the west windows, at a building that had just quietly, without raising its own voice, done exactly what my grandmother built it to do 11 years before any of us knew we'd need it to. I stayed at the table a little longer after Greg walked off toward the archive room, just long enough to square the 4 pages back into the folder, corners lined up the way I always line things up. Robin picked up the canvas bag and held it open for me without a word, and I slid the folder inside next to a stack of programs from the ceremony and a spare phone charger I never did use that night. "You good?" she asked. "I will be," I said. "Ask me again in a week." She laughed, short and a little tired, the kind of laugh that comes out when a night has gone on twice as long as it was supposed to. "Deal. Come on. I'll walk you to the car when you're ready." No rush. I wasn't ready yet. I wanted to stand in that room a few more minutes while it still had the shape of the night in it. String lights, the last of the dessert table half picked over, somebody's aunt laughing too loud near the coat rack about something that had nothing to do with any of this. Most of the guests didn't know what they'd just watched. A few of them clearly did, the ones who drifted close enough to catch Barbara's binder opening, and I could see it in the way they held their drinks a little stiffer now, the way conversations near the head table had gone quieter and stayed that way. Greg came back one more time before I left, his jacket already half on. "Monday, 10 o'clock, my office," he said. "Bring whatever else you've got. We'll make it official, and I want the language airtight before anyone's lawyer gets ambitious about appealing a vote that happened in front of 40 witnesses." "I'll be there," I said. "I'll bring all of it. Copies, not originals. Kenneth already told me to keep the originals in a safe deposit box, not the office safe." "Smart man," Greg said, and something in his face eased a little, like he was relieved I'd already thought of it. "You're going to do fine running this place alone, Nicole. I want you to hear that from somebody who isn't your family tonight, because I don't think anybody in your family is in a position to say it to you right now and mean it." I didn't have an answer ready for that, so I just nodded, and he squeezed my shoulder once and headed for the door. Robin drove me home. I didn't argue about my own car, which was still parked crooked in the side lot where I'd left it in April with a folder on the passenger seat, because tonight it felt smarter to let somebody else handle the driving and pick my car up in the morning. We didn't talk much on the way. The radio low, streetlights sliding past the windshield in that steady rhythm that always makes a town feel smaller at night than it is in the daytime. Somewhere past the bridge, she finally said, "You know Danny's company's not going to survive this." "I know," I said. "Does that bother you?" I thought about it honestly before I answered, because it deserved an honest answer. It bothers me that a company folding means people lose jobs who had nothing to do with any of this. It doesn't bother me that the sale fell through. That building was never his to buy. She nodded like that was the right kind of answer and didn't push further. My phone buzzed twice before I even got inside my apartment, and I checked it standing in the hallway with my key still in the lock. One text from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be one of Danny's project managers, apparently having gotten my number from somewhere in all this and wanting to know if the hall's board had any comment for the record, which told me the collapse was already moving faster than a Monday morning. I didn't answer that one. The second text was from William, just 4 words. "Talk tomorrow. Please, Nicole." I read it twice and put the phone face down on the counter and didn't answer it that night either. Not because I was angry at him specifically, but because I didn't trust my own voice yet to be as even as I wanted it to be, and I'd learned a long time ago not to have important conversations on a night when I was still running on adrenaline and string lights. Sunday I spent mostly at the hall itself, alone, which felt right. Robin offered to come help me strike the decorations, and I told her I wanted to do it by myself, and she understood that the way she understands most things about me without needing it spelled out. I took down the lights one string at a time, folded the linen, swept the floor Janet had swept 1,000 times before me, and somewhere in the middle of all that quiet, ordinary work, the whole strange enormity of the night before finally settled into something I could hold instead of something holding me. This building was mine to run now, plainly on paper, in a way it hadn't quite been the day before, even though I'd been doing the job for 7 years. That felt less like a victory and more like a fact finally catching up to what had always been true. Monday morning I went in early, coffee in one hand, the canvas bag in the other. Copies of everything sorted into a fresh folder because Kenneth Barber had been right that the originals belonged somewhere with better locks than the ones this whole mess had been about in the first place. Greg's office was small, second floor of a building 2 blocks off the square, the kind of office that smelled like old carpet and printer toner. Barber was already there when I arrived, along with the 2 board members who'd been close enough to the head table Saturday night to be pulled into the vote. A woman named Alvarez, who ran the County Historical Society, and a retired school teacher named Owusu, who'd been on the board since before I started working at the hall. They both looked a little rattled still. The way people look the morning after they've done something necessary that they never expected to have to do at a party. "We've drafted the resolution," Greg said, sliding a document across the table toward me. "Formal language. Carol Hamilton's trustee seat is vacated effective the date of the vote. Full custodial and sale approval authority vests in you as sole custodian per the 2015 trust, as amended in 2017. We need a replacement trustee named within 90 days per the bylaws, but that's a separate process, and it doesn't touch your authority either way." "Understood," I said, and I read it through twice before I signed it. Not because I doubted the language, but because Barber had taught me that much at least, that you read everything twice before your name goes anywhere near it. Barber cleared his throat once the signatures were done. "I filed the complaint with the state licensing office this morning. It's a formal referral, not a rumor. They'll open an inquiry. Given the size of the undisclosed commission and the family relationship to the buyer, I'd expect it to move faster than most of these do. I wanted you to hear that from me directly, not read about it somewhere." "Thank you," I said, and meant it, because there was something almost gentle in the way he kept doing that, telling me things straight before they could reach me sideways. "And Roman Riverside," he added, quieter. "I heard from a colleague this morning. They're filing for dissolution. The riverfront debt from 2024, plus whatever they'd already sunk into due diligence on the hall sale, it wasn't a company that could absorb another dead deal. I'm not saying that to gloat, Nicole. I'm saying it because you should hear the size of what this actually was before somebody else's version of it reaches you first." I sat with that for a second, the coffee going lukewarm in my hand. "I didn't do that," I said, mostly to myself. "The sale falling through did that. The sale falling through because it was never legitimate to begin with." "That's exactly right," Barber said. "I want you to keep holding on to that distinction, because there'll be people in the weeks ahead who try to blur it for you. Don't let them." Greg walked me out afterward down the narrow stairwell to the street, and he shook my hand at the bottom like we were closing an actual meeting instead of just standing on a sidewalk. "Get some rest this week if you can," he said. "I know that's easier said than done running that place solo, but you earned a slow Tuesday if there's such a thing." I laughed. Actually laughed. The first time since Saturday night. I'll see what I can do. Walking back to my car, my phone buzzed again. William this time, not a text. A call. I stood on the sidewalk a moment with it ringing in my hand, watching a delivery truck idle outside the bakery on the corner, and I thought about the 4 words he'd sent me the night before. "Please, Nicole," and about the way he'd stood apart from both of them at the party, not going to Carol's side, not going to Valerie's, just standing near the window with his hands in his pockets, looking older than I'd ever thought of him as looking. I picked up, and for a second neither of us said anything, just the sound of his breathing and the delivery truck's engine idling behind me on the corner. "Nicole." His voice was rougher than I remembered it. "Thank you for answering. I said I'd talk to you." I found a bench outside the bakery and sat down on it, my coffee balanced on my knee. "So talk. I'm not calling to defend your mother or your sister." He stopped, and I heard him exhale, long and slow, the way he used to before he told me something he didn't want to tell me. Back when I was a kid, and he had to explain why a dog wasn't coming home or why a job hadn't worked out. I'm calling because I stood there for 4 months and watched this happen, and I didn't say a word. Not when Carol told me she was holding on to that spare card for Valerie's convenience. Not when I saw the listing paperwork on the kitchen table and didn't ask why your name wasn't on it. I saw pieces of it, Nicole. I didn't want to look at the whole thing because looking at the whole thing meant doing something about it, and I didn't. Why not? I wasn't angry when I asked it. I was actually curious, the way you're curious about a fact you've wanted, explained for a long time, and finally have the chance to ask straight out. Because it was easier, he said. Because your mother gets a certain look when she's decided something, and I've spent 40 years learning it's not worth the fight to change her mind once that look's in place. And because some part of me thought, she's the oldest, she's the broker, maybe she does understand the business side of this better than the rest of us. I told myself a story where staying quiet was neutral. It wasn't neutral. I know that now. I knew it Saturday night, watching you stand there with that folder, doing by yourself what I should have helped you do months ago, or at the very least should have stood next to you for. I looked across the street at the bakery window, somebody's kid pressed against the glass looking at a tray of cookies, and I thought about how long I'd wanted to hear something like this from him, and how strange it felt now that I finally had it, quieter than I'd imagined, and smaller too, in a good way. I'm not going to pretend that fixes anything, he said. I'm not asking you to say it's fine. I just needed you to hear it from me, plainly, not folded into some family dinner where your mother's in the room deciding how the conversation goes. I'm sorry, Nicole. I should have used my own voice a long time before Saturday. Okay, I said. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, not fully. But it was something. A door left open instead of shut. And that felt like the honest amount to give him back. I hear you. I'm glad you called. Can I take you to lunch sometime this week? Just us. No agenda. A pause. I mean that. No agenda. Thursday, I said. I've got a rental walkthrough at 11, but I'm free after 1. Thursday, he agreed, and there was something almost boyish in his relief. The sound of a man who'd been braced for a door slamming and gotten a hinge instead. Thank you. I sat on that bench a while after we hung up, watching the kid in the bakery window get pulled away by somebody's hand, watching the truck finally pull off the curb and merge into traffic. My father had apologized to me. Not at the party, not in front of the board, not where it would have cost him anything socially or made him look good doing it. In private, on a phone call on a Monday morning, which was its own kind of honest, actually. He hadn't tried to turn it into a performance. He'd just said the true thing and let it be small. Carol never called. I want to say that plainly because I spent a while in those first weeks half expecting it, checking my phone a little too often on the drive home, wondering if she'd show up at the hall unannounced the way she used to when I was in high school, and she wanted to see how a project was coming along. She didn't. I heard through the county grapevine that runs faster in a town this size than any actual news source that she'd resigned from 2 other community committees before the licensing board even scheduled its first hearing on Valerie's file, and that she and William were living a little differently under the same roof now, though I never asked him about that directly, and he never volunteered it beyond what I could tell, just from how he talked about home on our Thursday lunches, which became a standing thing. Every week, no agenda, just him and me in whatever diner we picked that day. Valerie didn't call either. I heard about her mostly secondhand, too. The state licensing office moved on the referral faster than Barber had predicted, an inquiry that turned into a suspension while it was pending, which for a broker means the phone stops ringing whether or not you want it to. Danny's company filed for dissolution before the summer was out, exactly the way Barber said it would. The riverfront debt from years back finally catching up to a business that never had the room to absorb one more collapsed deal. I didn't feel triumphant hearing it. I felt something closer to the quiet you feel after a storm passes through a town you love. Relief mixed with an awareness of what got knocked down along the way. Jobs that had nothing to do with any of this. People who worked for a company that failed because of choices they never made. Robin asked me once, a few weeks in, whether I thought Valerie would ever reach out. We were doing inventory in the storage room off the kitchen, counting folding chairs, the kind of task that leaves plenty of room to talk about things that aren't chairs. "I don't know," I said. I used to think I knew exactly how she'd come around eventually. Now I don't think I know anything about how she thinks. Maybe I never did. Would you want her to? Reach out? I thought about it honestly, the way I try to think about everything now, slow, without rushing to the answer that sounds best out loud. I'd want an honest one, not an apology that's really an argument for why she was right to try it. I don't think I'll get that kind from her, so mostly I've stopped waiting on it. Robin nodded and didn't push, because that's what she does. She lets a thing sit exactly as heavy as it actually is, instead of trying to make it lighter for my sake. The hall kept running the whole time, which surprised me a little. How ordinary the work stayed, even while the family part of my life had rearranged itself so completely. I booked a wedding for the fall. I fixed a leak in the northeast gutter myself with a ladder and a tube of sealant, because the quote from the contractor was more than the budget line could carry that quarter. I trained a new part-time coordinator, a college kid named Alvarez, no relation to the Historical Society woman on the board, just a coincidence of a common name in a small county, who turned out to have a good eye for table layouts and an even better memory for which vendors actually show up on time. Some evenings, closing up alone, I'd walk the main hall after everyone else had gone, the string lights down now, replaced by the plain overhead fixtures Janet had installed back before I was even born. And I'd think about her, about a woman I barely remember, except in pieces. A voice reading me a bedtime story once when I was small enough to still be carried to bed afterward. A hand steady on my shoulder, the first time she walked me through this building and told me what it was for. She built a lock into this place 11 years before anyone needed it. She trusted a version of me that didn't exist yet to be the one who'd need it. I think about that more than almost anything else these days. That kind of trust plays so far ahead of itself, and how strange it is to grow into exactly the shape somebody hoped you would. I still have her letter. I keep it in the same drawer as the key card report, not because they belong together exactly, but because I like knowing they're both close. The proof and the reason, side by side. Here's what I've learned. Running this place, alone now, on my own terms, deciding who gets a key and who doesn't, who I let back into this building and who I don't. Family doesn't get you a card. Trust does. And trust, once it's spent, doesn't come back just because somebody finally says the word sorry out loud. Sometimes the only honest ending is a door that stays open to some people and closed to others, and you make your peace with which is which. If somebody in your own family ever tried to lock you out of something that was rightfully yours, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right where you are. I read every one. And if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe, because there's another woman out there tonight who needs to hear that the quiet ones keep the receipts, and they always, eventually, get read out loud.